faced a dilemma, to stay or to go. Families were divided, as in the home of Brigitte Marx, who lived in Hattingen, a small manufacturing town on the River Ruhr in western Germany.
My father wasn't going to leave Germany. My mother says we must get out. But my father was very stubborn. He says, I've got a profession here, I'm making a very good living, and I'm not leaving.
But as it became clear that things would not go back to normal, thousands of German Jews emigrated, or tried to. For the elderly, the poor or the unskilled, the obstacles were formidable. The global recession limited the welcome they could expect in other countries. Hans Jackson, then Hans Josephi, a Berliner born in 1921, joined the scramble to get a visa.
After 1936, it became urgent to find some way of getting out. I used to get up in the morning at 7 o'clock and go to the different embassies, queue up in front of them and try and get visas. Chile, Hong Kong, Uruguay even. For my parents, they still looked at it, we are too old. My father, he was already in his 60s. My mother was over 50. For them, contemplating anywhere to go in the world seemed an impossibility. They had no chance.
In March 1938, Nazi Germany annexed Austria. Within a few weeks, Austrian Jews suffered all the discriminatory legislation and terror that had been inflicted on German Jews over the previous 5 years. Fred Dunstan, then Fritz Deutsch, was a young Jewish scout leader in Vienna.
It changed overnight. It was like a nightmare, because the Nazis in their brown shirts were just everywhere. And they were shouting, ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, one people, one country or one empire and one leader. And everywhere they were singing the famous Horst Hessel lied, and it was very frightening. So when I had a sleepless night, and I said to myself, goodness knows, it needs a miracle. How will I ever get out of this situation? You felt trapped. There was no way you could even imagine how you could get out of this.
On the night of the 9th of November 1938, the Nazis staged the pogrom that became known as the Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht. Edith Nissen, then a 6-year-old in Dortmund, recalls the terror.
My father was in business, and I remember they went to his business and threw everything out of the window. All his rolls of material. He was a gentleman's tailor, and everything, the machinery, rolls of material, everything was thrown out of the window. They came to our home, and the same happened. And they threw my doll's primer, my doll, and my toys out of the window. I remember we were all in one bed with my parents, and then we had big wooden doors to our apartment. They smashed our furniture, smashed everything, and threw everything out of the window.
The pogrom in Germany and Austria was intended to accelerate Jewish emigration. Jewish men were detained in concentration camps until they were ransomed by their family and proof given that they were leaving the country. There was chaos as Jewish women begged for visas that would get husbands or sons out of the camps. Thousands tried to leave the Reich, among them Fred Dunstan and Eva Urbach.
Generally speaking, it was everybody for himself. I mean, the better off people with connection, of course, could get either to this country, or if you had money, you could go to South America, to Argentina, Brazil. When you say where, I mean anywhere. You had to grab any possible chance that there was. But a lot of people who are ultimately perished, including my own poor parents, I mean, there wasn't any chance.
I remember going to the British Embassy It was in a courtyard. It wasn't a house by itself. We were standing in the courtyard. There were millions of people standing there. You couldn't move. We never moved forward or backwards at all. And in the evening, we just had to go home.
Kristallnacht outraged opinion in Britain and galvanised refugee workers. Save the Children was already working with the Central British Fund for German Jewry to evacuate children from the Third Reich. Now, with the Quakers, they set up the Refugee Children's Movement to organise mass rescue. The British government had been unwilling to relax its strict immigration controls, but the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, was shocked by the November pogrom. Following pleas from Jewish leaders and refugee campaigners, the government made one major concession. As the Home Secretary, Sir Samuel Hoare, told Parliament on the 21st of November 1938.
I had only this morning a very valuable discussion with Lord Samuel and a number of Jewish and other religious workers. I can give the assurance tonight that we shall put no obstacle in the way of children coming here and living in the conditions that were described to me by Lord Samuel and his colleagues this morning.
Those conditions stipulated that the children would not place any costs on the Exchequer and would re-emigrate as soon as possible. At once, the Jewish refugee agencies sent envoys to Berlin and Vienna and recruited local helpers to identify, assemble and accompany children to be evacuated. Hans Jackson volunteered to work at the Jewish community offices in Berlin, trying to help the anguished parents.
Their faces showed a question mark. Was, how can I get out? What can you do for me? Desperation was in amongst it, and aggravation and screaming, and it was just a mental agony. Desperation of trying to find what's the best to do. A person came there, I've got to get myself, my children, my wife, I want them, where can we go? Can you get something for us? Why can't you get something for us? What are you doing here? And the people knowing we have so many places.
In Vienna, Scoutmaster Fred Dunstan was called on to assemble a group of 100 children to travel to Britain on what became known as a Kindertransport, a children's transport. He had just 1 week.
He buckled down to it, and my second in command phoned up 8 of his former patrol leaders. They turned up immediately with their bikes, and whilst they came, within half hour we have written lists according to various districts, and they called on the parents and children and whoever happened to be at home, dropped everything and came to queue up. And there was, within an hour, there was a queue, probably of 100, even if not more, trying to get their children registered. So we got on with it. And I myself, I worked 2 nights running because in those days you didn't have photocopiers. So what you had to do is you had 2 typists typing at the same time, and the third person was dictating names and addresses. And I don't think I've ever typed better.
Germany annexed the border region of Czechoslovakia in October 1938 and occupied the Czech lands in the following March. The rescue effort had to be extended. Carol Rice, now the celebrated director of films including The French Lieutenant's Woman, came from a German-Czech family in Moravia.
My parents had sent my brother, who's 4 years older than me, in 1936 to an English boarding school, really to spend 3 years in England to learn English and to be educated. And even before the Germans came into Czechoslovakia, my parents were making plans to try and send me to England to join my brother at this English boarding school. But the theory was that they were going to come to England, or they also were trying to get visas to the Argentine. And certainly I came to England absolutely believing that it was just a matter of weeks or at most months before my parents would join us.
The parents faced an agonizing decision. They could save their children from persecution by responding to the offer of help and sending them to Britain, but only at the cost of relinquishing their loved ones. The most natural instinct to protect their children entailed the most unnatural gesture, giving them up to strangers and an uncertain future in a foreign land. Once they decided to place their children on the Kindertransports, they had to prepare them and themselves for the moment of separation.
They were torn in half, naturally. On the one hand, they felt, at least my child will be safe, like my own parents. They were certainly happy when they heard I had a chance of emigrating, you see. But at the same time, adults could see a little further and they could feel that maybe they would never see their children again.
Yes, my parents talked to me about it. They put it in the most positive possible light as a temporary separation for my own good, and I'd have a much happier life in England. But of course, I didn't know, as I don't think any of the children who left Germany and Austria at the time realized, that we wouldn't see our parents again. I'm not sure to what extent our parents realized that either.
The Nazis had seized the father of 11-year-old Brigitte Marx during Kristallnacht and were holding him in prison. So her mother made the decision alone.
She just told us that we were going to greener pastures, that what we had experienced would never happen again, and that we must just look into the future. She never said they would join us.
So you think that she knew that the parting was forever?
I don't know.
Community workers selected the most vulnerable and endangered children, teenagers just released from concentration camps, orphans and children whose parents were imprisoned or impoverished. Local helpers assembled groups up to 200 strong and took them to the stations where specially chartered trains were waiting. Like lots of the younger children, Ruth Michaelis, born in Mainz and only 4 years old, couldn't understand what was going on.
I can remember being at the zoo station in Berlin and wanting to go to the zoo instead of going on a train to England. I used to go to the zoo with my aunt. I remember going to the zoo with her, just snatches of feeding the monkeys there, which was something I enjoyed.
Eva Urbach's mother told her to take special care of her little sister, Uli.
On the platform, all you saw was children, and their parents, crying, handkerchiefs. I remember standing at the windows. My parents were standing outside. I only remember standing at the station, looking out of the train to say goodbye as the train was nearly going to leave.
I thought it was a temporary thing. It was a temporary party. We did not realize the seriousness. And children don't. Children have got a different outlook, I think.
You don't. You expected to see your parents again. You mustn't forget, you see lots of other children. You talk about, I don't know, whatever children talk about. You laugh.
It was like going on holiday in a way.
It was going on holiday.
Children don't think of danger. They don't, all right, you cry for 5 or 10 minutes, but then you're together with other children and you forget your troubles.
And they're all in the same boat as you are.
I certainly remember the train leaving, and there seemed to be some sort of awful act of finality about it. I didn't know where I was going, and it was very noticeable. As soon as we crossed the Dutch border, there was a sense of relief. Children had been very quiet up to that point and fearful that the whole thing might still not happen. And as soon as we crossed the Dutch border, there was a difference in the atmosphere. And certainly we were happy, even though some of us may not have looked all that happy, because the Dutch people were so extraordinarily kind and generous, something which we weren't used to. They were waiting on the platforms for us with fruit and sandwiches and sweets and chocolates and so on. And it was a very heartwarming experience.
Not all the children had a trouble-free journey. Police and border guards frequently came onto the trains to inflict a last dose of terror on the young travellers.
Custom, they came and opened my suitcase to see if I've got any money or something, and they took all the sanitary towels out, which was very embarrassing at that age. And they took it, throw them on the floor and just wash the floor with it. With their feet, wash the floor with it. And all you could do is throw them all out.
From the border, the children were taken to the Hook of Holland and straight onto ferries for Harwich on the east coast of England.
I remember being terrified of getting onto the boat at the Hook of Holland. And I remember that I spoke my first English sentence on the boat. I had been taught English a little bit by a Fräulein in my hometown. And I remember I said to the rather surprised steward on the boat, "The sea is not at all rough today, is it, sir?" And he looked at me as though I was nuts. Anyway, that was my first attempt at English.
I remember asking, is this England? Are we there? I remember the boat, because it was a night crossing, and I remember being alarmed at the size of the boat. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have seen a boat before, other than perhaps the little boats in my bath. And I was convinced that this boat, with so many people piling on and so much luggage, would sink. How could it possibly float?
We were all seasick. We went on the ferry, and it was so wild, the waves were so wild, that in the morning when we all had to get on deck of the ferry, everybody had a white face and looked miserable.
When we went Hook van Holland went onto the boat, they separated us for age groups, and I got separated from her. And when I woke up on the boat next morning, I was on my own. So, as usual, started crying, and I went through the whole boat. Has anybody seen a girl ever in a red jumper? That's all I could think of. And eventually I found her, and she started, "Go and wash your face."
Here is the world's news in pictures, and this is Cathay Gazette screening it.
200 boys and girls wave a greeting to England, land of the free. They are between the ages of 5 and 17, the advance guard of the first 5,000 Jewish and non-Aryan child refugees from Germany. They'll be provided with a temporary home here, while arrangements are made for them to immigrate.
At Harwich, the children were met by workers for the Refugee Children's Movement, or for other groups like the Zionist Youth Aliyah, which intended to prepare teenagers for emigration to Palestine. Those with relatives or foster parents awaiting them went straight to Liverpool Street Station in London. But only 500 families responded to the first appeal for foster homes, and it took time for the refugee agencies to vet them. Meanwhile, the children went to 2 hastily converted holiday camps.
Coaches take them to camp at Dovercourt, run by the British Committee for the Care of Children from Germany, and the youngsters tuck in as if they hadn't a care in the world. What a blessing to be young.
In a few weeks, Dovercourt Camp in Essex became temporary home to nearly 1,000 children. It was overcrowded, Spartan, and often chaotic. In an attempt to elicit more offers of homes, the BBC made a programme about Dovercourt.
Hello, here is Lothar, who is 13 and comes from Berlin. He will tell you what the boys do in the camp. A bell rings at 8 o'clock and we have to get up. Some boys get up earlier to make a run to the sea, which is near the camp. 8:30 we have good English breakfast, which we enjoy. First we did not eat porridge,
but now we like it. When we finish the breakfast, we get the letters or cards from our parents. Then we are all very happy. After that, we clear and tidy our rooms. Then we have 2-hour lessons in English.
Lothar Baruch, Then a 14-year-old boy from Pomerania is now Leslie Brent, an eminent professor of immunology.
After tea we can go to the sea, which is wonderful, or we play English games or football. In the evening we learn a lot of English songs till we go to bed. I sleep with 2 other boys in a little nice house. Now I will go to school, then I can't speak English good. And then I would like to become a cook. We are all very happy to be in England.
I remember making the broadcast and we'd been told, try and paint as positive a picture as possible. And that's why my message was probably as positive as it could be about life in Dovercourt Camp, even though that had its problems. I mean, there were problems in Dovercourt Camp. I was appalled by the fact that there were actually some knife fights going on between boys rather older than me from Vienna and Berlin. It must have been some traditional enmity between the Viennese and the Germans, and this was continued into Dovercourt Camp. I couldn't believe my eyes. I mean, it's unbelievable, really.
And where is your home, Brigitte? My home is in Westfalen. What was your journey like? Oh, we had a very good journey, but we must make it quite alone. No one was allowed to come with us, and I must carry my luggage always, and it was very heavy.
I remember meeting these fellows, and they said they are from the BBC, and seeing that I had said I could speak English, I must please follow. And I said, no, I can't. And they said, but we are from the BBC. And they took me along and we made this broadcast.
Brigitte Marx is now Gitte Rossi Zalmans, a mother of 3 living in Johannesburg. She remembers that when she recorded her broadcast in 1939, she was told not to give too much information about herself in case it endangered her family.
My mother was very sad that she must not come on the platform and say goodbye to me. It is nice to be in camp with all the other children. I feel not so alone.
My parents heard it in Germany. I wrote to them. And they were not allowed to listen to foreign stations, but apparently they did listen to this broadcast. They said that they heard it and they were very proud of me.
How do you like the English, Marion? Oh, Kate, they are all so very kind to us. They try to make us feel quite at home, and they succeed. What are you going to do here in England, Marion? I would like to study music, because I wish to become a piano teacher. In Germany I have started, and therefore I will try to finish it here.
60 years on, Marianne Hess is now a widow living in Seattle. In 1939, she and her brother Jürgen played a duet for the BBC. Marianne, like most of the other Dovercourt children, has one enduring memory: the cold. The camp wasn't built for the bitter winter of 1938. It was so cold that the BBC recording equipment froze and had to be kept working with special heaters.
It was icy cold because this was a summer camp and there was no heat. And when we were eating breakfast, we had to have gloves on and winter jackets and whatever we had with us. We only were allowed one coat. The Nazis even restricted whatever we took with us.
Ja, sprichst du Englisch?
Ich kann schon lesen.
Ja? Nun, was sagst du? Kannst du wie alt du bist sagen?
Ja.
Na, nun sag mal das in Englisch.
6.
6, yes, that's quite right, you're 6.
Ich kann ja bis 100 auf Englisch zählen.
Can you count in English? Yes, no count. 1,
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Ich kann mit.
Ja?
100.
Ja, wirklich, ich bin 100. Oh, du bist ein kluges Mädchen, nicht?
Ja.
We had English lessons. Somebody came to teach us English for the first few months. You remember?
But I had a bad corn on my toe, and I asked the matron if she could give me anything. I couldn't. I mean, corn is not a... In German, if you translate it, it's a chicken eye. And I asked her, could she give me anything for my chicken eye? And she didn't know what I wanted. You see, things like that happened all the time, but eventually you could make yourself understood.
Now, everyone, where are we going?
Lambeth, Uncle Henry.
One thing I remember learning in Dovercourt, and that was a Lambeth walk. That's the only thing I remember I learned there, how to sing and how to dance the Lambeth walk.
Anytime you're Lambeth way, any evening, any day, you'll find us all doing the Lambeth walk. Every little Lambeth gal.
It wasn't a bad place. We had a lot of fun, we laughed, but on a Saturday and Sunday was just like a cattle market. We sat on very, very long tables and people came and looked. And you had to get up and turn round, especially young ones. And they took you in their home.
We were actually very fortunate.
We were exceedingly fortunate.
We were taken in this home in Waverley, and we could not have been looked after better. I only wished at the time that our parents should have known how well we were looked after.
With spring, the camp emptied out as foster parents came forward. Those who left had mixed experiences. Some went to boarding schools where institutional care was well developed. Leslie Brent went to Bunce Court, a school from Germany which had been evacuated en masse.
There are some children who were in Bunce Court who didn't take at all well to what I regarded to be paradise compared to my previous experience in Germany, because they were usually single children who had been snatched straight from their homes into what in institutionalized life, and they didn't take very kindly to it and were very unhappy. But that was a minority. The majority were extremely happy and appreciative of what was being done for them.
Not everyone was lucky. Edith Nissen and her brother were taken in by a distant relative.
When we arrived at Liverpool Street Station, people came to collect the children. My father's second cousin came to collect us, took us to his home, and my brother and I, we couldn't believe what we saw. He had 5 children of his own, and it was in the East End, and it was just so horrible to describe. I mean, I can't even describe. It was so awful, very dirty. We saw bugs crawling up the walls, and we decided we're not staying. We can't stay here. We've got to go. And of course we ran back to Liverpool Street Station. We wanted to get on a train to go back to Germany, and he followed us and brought us back and told us we can never go back.
While most foster parents treated their young charges with great care, many others exploited older children as unpaid domestic labour. The local volunteer committees that inspected foster homes rarely paid attention to compatibility. Edith Nissen was moved from family to family.
They made little servants out of us. I remember I had to clean the house before I went to school with one family. And I was always late for school, and I used to run to school, and I was always told off by the mistress of the class, always told off that I was late. But then I was left in Fordham with another awful family. They used to give me my tea when I came home from school, a sandwich, and I used to have to sit in the ditch and eat it. They didn't allow me to sit and eat with them. I went to the local school, and as I was different, I was very dark-skinned, and I spoke with an accent, and they used to call me Dirty German Jew. I used to say to Mrs. Voss, why do they call me Dirty German Jew? I'm not dirty.
The refugee agencies were overstretched, and many children can't recall any contact with the authorities. To the anger of Orthodox Jews, hundreds of children were placed with Christian families. But the small Jewish community in Britain couldn't provide enough Orthodox Jewish homes. The lack of supervision was aggravated by the outbreak of war. children living in big cities were evacuated. In the summer of 1940, 1,000 teenagers, including most of the helpers, Fred Dunstan and Hans Jackson amongst them, were interned as enemy aliens. By this time, some, like Edith Nissen, had been forced to move 3 or 4 times in a few months.
As far as the Jewish Refugee Committee is concerned, they didn't do what they should have done. They didn't. I mean, how they could abandon... I mean, I'm not the only one. When I now speak to other people, children were just abandoned and left with families, adopted by non-Jewish people. Children were abused. They didn't keep in touch. They didn't keep in contact. I mean, that's very sad.
Ruth Michaelis and her brother found themselves living with an English rector, his wife, and her female companion.
I remember the rector's wife as being the cruel one because she used to beat me with a leather strap when I wet my bed. I hated bath time, and the companion bathed us, and my brother said she used to push a sponge in my face, which I do remember. My brother says that she knocked me flat in the bath once, and he pushed her side and dragged me out. Otherwise, he says I would have drowned.
Were you aware that anyone from the agencies that had brought over the children was keeping track of your progress? Did anyone visit? Did anyone inquire? Did you feel that you had been abandoned?
That is inevitably what children do feel. I can just remember trying ever so hard to fathom out what people wanted of me. I really desperately wanted to please and be accepted, and it never made any sense, however hard I tried. I got it wrong, and I came in for beatings and all sorts of punishments, which I couldn't make any other meaning out of except that I was bad. And though I wouldn't have been consciously aware of it, what would have been going on was a profound feeling that I'd been thrown out of my parents' home and out of Germany because I was bad, I wasn't good enough.
Ruth was eventually sent to a school run by the Quakers, who played an outstanding role in helping the children. The staff there showed much more understanding.
I remember being shown into the dormitory and shown where my bed was going to be because I could put my doll and things on the bed. And I remember bursting into tears and the matron taking enormous trouble to sit me down and talk to me until I was able to tell her that I was afraid of wetting my bed. And I can remember her taking me round the dormitory and showing me that every single bed had a rubber mattress and telling me that it was usual. Most children wet the bed when they first came to a new place. And I don't remember ever wetting the bed after that.
Carol Rice also found refuge with the Quakers.
I went to Reading, where there was the Quaker school that my brother was at, Leighton Park School in Reading. And the headmaster came to the railway station and said to me, I know what you'll be needing here. You'll be needing a bicycle, and I'll buy you a bicycle. And he bought me a bicycle. And I was incredibly fortunate that I was placed in this very civilized, progressive Quaker boarding school, where I spent the next 3.5 years enjoying rugger and cricket and English school life.
In late 1941, the Nazis began to deport German and Austrian Jews to ghettos in Poland and Russia. Czech Jews were sent to a ghetto in Theresienstadt. After Hitler decided to murder all the Jews under his control, they were shot or killed with poison gas at Auschwitz. Until the end, parents struggled to remain in contact with their children, but the letters became shorter and rarer.
I think this is from my mother and father. My dearly beloved 2 children, darling Edith and darling Freddie. Our heartiest thanks for your nice and loving letter. We had great happiness reading it. We hope we will soon meet again. Our dear God will see that everything will be fine. Our dear God will see that everything will be fine until a happy reunion. Keep fine and well, my darling children. And my darling boy, take good care of your darling sister. And 1,000 kisses. These are kisses for you, my beloved darling children. Kisses from your loving Mama and Papa.
I received Red Cross messages which were 25 words, I think, on a form, and had a reply form on the other side, and you sent it back, again 25 words. And I've been told that I have to be very careful about what I write, and something rather neutral messages about telling them what I was doing. And those messages continued until 1942. And the last message I received from my parents said something like, "We are going on a journey." Now, at that time, I didn't know what that meant, going on a journey, but they must have realized that they were about to be deported and were still able to send this message. But the words, "We're going on a journey," seem very ominous in retrospect.
The older children passed through schools and into the armed forces. Wearing the uniforms of the victorious Allies, a few made their way back to their hometowns. At the City Hall in Berlin, Leslie Brent, by then an army lieutenant, uncovered the last trace of his parents.
They looked up their records, such as they were, and came up with the answer: my parents and my sister had been sent east. Now, at that time, I didn't actually know what being sent east meant, necessarily. And then, when I went on leave and went to the cinema in London, I saw a Pathy News bulletin of the liberation of Belsen. And that's when the penny really dropped, and I realized that this must have been the fate my parents had experienced.
I, as a member of Parliament, with 9 others, visited Buchenwald concentration camp. Some people believe that the reports of what happened there are exaggerated. No words could exaggerate. We saw and we know. In pictures you have no smell of disease and death. Here you see no more than a fragment of the full pattern of horror. This is Belsen, another center of brutality, starvation and disease. You see our troops moving in. It is these men who so strongly advocate the publication of these pictures, which show only in small part what they see in reality. Remember, there are 18 of these German concentration camps.
And that's the first time I really sort of broke down. I was nearly sick to rush out of the cinema. And I knew that they must have died in a concentration camp of that kind, though I had no certainty of it. And one of my problems has always been that there's never been any certainty. I've never discovered a grave, I've never discovered a document saying, yes, they died in Auschwitz or they died wherever. And the nearest I've come to that, I suppose, was when, about 12 years ago, we went to Auschwitz and managed to buy some white flowers somewhere. And we went to the memorial and I left those flowers there. And that's when I really wept for the first time.
We were hoping, we were hoping, we were hoping. You can't live your life without hope. And we were hoping.
We're back now in Piccadilly Circus, into a Piccadilly Circus which now, although it's after midnight here in London, is crowded as it's never been crowded before. And as for the noise of it, well, listen for yourselves to central London V.J. Raw.
I remember the day, the VJ day. I came home. I was living with my sister, and I came home and I was very excited because I'd made plans with my friend how we were going to celebrate. And my sister said to me, "You've got nothing to celebrate." She just had a letter, what happened to my parents. So she said, "You've got nothing to celebrate."
Carol Rice was serving in the Czech squadron of the RAF when the war ended.
We were all flown home in Liberators and landed, and then everybody deserted. People had been away from home for 5 years, 10 years and so on. And I went by train to my hometown to see. And there was in fact one cousin, a dentist, who had been in Theresienstadt, who survived because he had typhoid fever during when one of the transports was leaving. So he just skipped that. I looked after him a bit and started the whole procedure of getting our property back for him to have somewhere to live. And then 4 weeks later, the Czech forces made an amnesty and said all the people who run away should come back and take part in the victory celebrations. So we went back to Prague, and there I marched through Prague, triumphant victor. Felt a complete arse. And then, by that time, of course, I knew that my parents had not survived. And I deserted and hitchhiked back to England.
In a few remarkable cases, parents survived the war. But parents and children found that ties of family had been worn thin by the years of separation. And as Ruth Michaelis discovered, they had all changed.
In my mind, you could say I had killed off my mother because the whole situation of her not being there was too painful to deal with, and the only way I could deal with her not being there was that she was dead and couldn't be there. The alternative, that she was somewhere else and had chosen to be somewhere else other than with me, I wouldn't have been able to deal with at 4.
Can you tell us how your parents first made contact with you again, how that contact was resumed and what it led to?
It was in the spring of 49 that my mother made contact. She then came over in the summer of 49, and she wanted to take me back to Germany, and I didn't want to go. I'd been uprooted too many times, and I wasn't an amenable little 4-year-old trying desperately to please. I was 14, and I turned into a very angry adolescent overnight sort of thing. And I remember meeting my mother with my brother. We met her off the train somewhere. But I remember seeing this, I feel quite ashamed to say it, seeing this big fat woman who was a total stranger and who I didn't want near me.
Ruth's mother, a Christian, had stayed in Germany. Her father had emigrated to Shanghai, but when he could, went back to rejoin his wife. He obtained a court order against Ruth's foster family in Britain, forcing her to return.
Germany was the last place on earth I wanted to go to, because I'd been brought up on the Beano and Dandy comics, where it was all about nasty Nazis and Germany being such a terrible place and where people did terrible things. Well, as I said, I became a very aggressive teenager, and my mother took me down to where she was living, but it was an impossible situation And they were very nice people, really, and they didn't want me to suffer, and they let me go back to England. You see, what nobody at the time realised they were doing, they were putting me through the Kindertransport experience a second time in reverse. For the second time, I overnight lost my home, my language, my friends, everything familiar.
Ruth came back to Britain, became a teacher and later a psychotherapist. Like most of the Kinder, she married, started a family and enjoyed a successful career.
Your Excellencies, my Lords, Chief Rabbi, honoured guests, and hello, Kinder!
60 years on, they meet again in London at their largest ever reunion. Of those who are alive today, who can be traced and are willing to come forward, 1,300 have gathered to share their stories and mourn those they have lost. But the emphasis is on celebration, a celebration of life.
It's quite a joyous occasion. We've made it. 60 years. And as you can see, it's the second generation and the third generation here, which is just very, very lovely to see.
It's really very extraordinary. I mean, all these people from all over the world, all roughly my age group or older, a few younger. It's an astonishing gathering of people who have the same sort of history and the same kind of past. Basically, I think we're all celebrating that we are alive and that we've managed to have productive lives. And so, yes, I think it's a wonderful occasion.
The children who had come from across Central Europe ended up all over the world. There are Kindertransport associations in North America, South Africa, Israel and Australia. Most overcame the trauma of parting and dislocation and built happy lives. A few were damaged beyond repair, succumbing to mental illness. But even the lucky ones couldn't escape the past. The arrival of children or grandchildren often triggered a realization of what their own mothers and fathers went through.
Could I have done that with my children, send them away? I don't think I could. I don't think I could.
I've got neighbours who've got a daughter who's as old as I was when I left home, and I can't bear to look at her sometimes. I think that is what I was like. And she's childish still, you know. She's not sophisticated at all. And I look at her and I think, I just can't believe it. It just doesn't enter my head somehow. It just is unbelievable.
I feel that I tried, and it was not a terrible mistake, but it was a mistake. I tried to protect my kids from too much knowledge or contact of my childhood. And I feel I sold them short in that sense. I did it partly because I sort of mistakenly thought I was protecting them against knowledge of dreadful things. But that was an error.
I've always regarded it as the ultimate sacrifice that a parent can make in those circumstances, sending a child out into the unknown. And that's still the way I feel about it. And having children myself, it makes that sacrifice even more heroic in a way, because I can't imagine myself sending a 13-year-old son of mine or daughter of mine away.
I think I was far too possessive of my children. It was something God had given me in return. And I don't think I could have done it. I think I'm too weak a person to do a thing like that. I would like to honor my mother for a tremendous courage of sending 2 children into a big wide world.
I think, Marion, you are as happy as I am to be in England. But my greatest sorrow is how to get my parents over.
Yes, that's it. There's no possibility for our parents to emigrate, and we don't know when we will see them again.
It's true. Only to make it easier for them, we left our home and went to England.
Why did you leave home?
I knew that this was the only way to help parents and to help me, and I don't regret it.
Some of the stories, evacuation, the true story.
You're some of the teachers who came down with the children, are you?
Yes, we started off about 7 o'clock on Sunday morning.
Oh yes, there were terribly tearful farewells and that. It was heartrending, really.
We didn't know where we were going. First of all, that was the most exciting part for the children. They kept on running up to drivers and asking where we were going.
And though Northampton was only a matter of 65 miles away, to us it could have been the Hebrides or the Orkneys, you know, we didn't know.
When we got to Chelmsford, there were thousands and thousands of children there, and we were drafted on to Saffron Walden, where we are now.
These people came in, and they definitely did say, you know, oh, I'll have her, I'll take that one.
By the end of the first week of the war, a quarter of the population of Britain had changed their address. Under the government's voluntary evacuation scheme, 1.5 million children had been transported from the cities into the countryside, an extraordinary feat in itself. Nearly as many people had evacuated themselves, privately. Official paranoia about massive German air attacks at the very outset of war had led to meticulous planning of the evacuation itself. The government, though, had paid less attention to the emotional and social upheaval involved.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
By the time Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister, made his announcement at 11 a.m. on September the 3rd, most evacuated children were already in their billets in the safe areas, trying to get used to living with strangers in an unfamiliar landscape. Some were frightened, others thrilled by the newness of it all.
Instead of lovely semis and pavements and things that I've been used to, as we marched into the village, we saw all these broken walls and sheep everywhere, and I felt really that I wish I was back home again.
I do remember how lovely the milk was. It was very creamy, and it was still warm.
We used to slide down the haystacks.
I used to climb trees for apples.
Asparagus, I'd never tasted before. We used to go brambling.
Picking blackberries. That was my first knowledge of blackberries when I was evacuated.
You cannot move 1.25 million women and children from the towns to the country without dislocation. I am here tonight to say that the government is doing its utmost to mitigate this dislocation.
3 weeks into the scheme, a broadcast by Sir Samuel Hoare, then Lord Privy Seal. It was the government's first public acknowledgement that settling vast numbers of children in the safe areas had run into trouble. It had all been done in a rush.
The cottage. Oh, nice. Oh, here it is.
This was you going back
Going
after
to visit
the war,
in 1954, yes.
54,
before I was
yes.
married, obviously.
Yeah.
Tom and Rita Glenister now live in a delightful house with a flower-filled garden in Muswell Hill, North London. They met and married after the war. Their lives as evacuees couldn't have been more different. Tom, then 7, had one bad billet after another, including one in Reading, in a household consisting of 3 women.
The women used to beat my sister, and the sores had lice in them. My brother and I had fleas, The women threatened my sister that if she said anything to my mother, she'd be in trouble.
Meanwhile, Rita, only 5, was living happily in an estate cottage in Somerset. Her foster parents were farm workers.
Uncle Frank and Auntie Flo. And they were lovely people. I can't praise them enough, because when growing up and doing housework, the hard work that must have been with all those children, they were wonderful people.
All I can remember was to continue being smacked by her hand for whatever reason. Yeah. Talking in later years with my father, he is adamant that the 2 women were running a brothel. They were actually a pair of prostitutes.
Did you talk about your childhood experiences when you first met?
Well, we talked, but not in great detail.
You'd say, well, you evacuated. Oh, yeah, where? I think, in a way, I suppose, like most soldiers do, you sort of put it behind you.
You do exchange experiences. But,
I did realise that I'd had a better place than him.
And so it is with most memories of evacuation, some good, some bad, which simply shows not only what a toss-up the choice of billet was, but that for many children, evacuation was like being sent to a hostile foreign country.
The village kids, they weren't allowed to mix with us.
I just remember knowing that we were different. We weren't actually part of that community.
There was a little girl lived down the road, and she used to lean over the gate when I went to school, and I used to stop to say good morning. And her mother came and called her in and said, "You mustn't talk to him."
There was a definite them and us. We were Londoners. We were outsiders.
Children are adaptable creatures, and these are no exception. Of course they miss their parents, what children would not. But these kindly West Country people are taking them to their hearts. The children are making new friends. They are seeing a new world.
Some really did see a new world. For a few lucky ones, it was like inheriting riches, as they found themselves living with the local aristocracy.
We went down this yellow path, and it reminded me of the yellow brick road. We saw this magnificent Tudor building.
The dinner was coming in every night on the trolley. The vegetables were in the tureens, the gravy was in the gravy boat, and this I'd never seen before.
One didn't play, one went out for walks. The sandwiches one took to school for lunch were wrapped in table napkins, not paper.
I mean, it was absolutely astonishing to be given, sat down at this table with all these knives and forks and all these things. I mean, it was like Eliza Doolittle.
One of those who threw open her country house in Berkshire was Nessa Hughes Smith.
Well, of course, I'd no idea they'd never sat down to a meal in their lives. And they put the porridge behind the radiators, and they threw... Dolly has since told me, she said we threw things out of the window, and you were never cross with us. And I learned how the other half lived, and they learned how we lived. And gradually, they've fitted into it.
But it didn't always work. The social historian Norman Longmate.
Quite often the children had not been used to having a proper lavatory. There were cases of children relieving themselves in the corner of the dining room, and of course once this had happened, the story was told all around the place and gathered exciting new details every time it was related. Often, of course, they were accustomed to swearing at home, and the families they moved into were absolutely horrified, words that they never in those days were heard in polite society.
Then we had the problem of people coming back and say, for God's sake, take them away, we can't stand it.
It was the billeting officers who bore the brunt of complaints. Geoffrey Barfoot was supervising the early days of evacuation in Weston-super-Mare.
I can particularly remember one man who came up and he said, "You've got to take them away. My wife's having a nervous breakdown." He said, "Every time they go to the lavatory, they smear shit all over her beautiful bathroom walls." Because a lot of those children in the East End of London in those days had no notion of a bathroom. They didn't even wash very much, I don't suppose.
Those were snobbish times, even more so than today.
In one or two isolated families, there's a certain amount of friction. I think this could be overcome in most cases if the refugees would not keep telling the householder how lucky they are.
The old man, he had a hook for a hand, and he used to terrify us with it, you know. He used to stick his hook in your face and say, you know, if you don't be good or do what you're told, I'll hang you on it on the door, sort of thing, you know.
For some, evacuation was a terrifying experience. Mere children sent to remote farms and cottages and forced by strangers to work on the land, or simply subjected to ill treatment. Terry McNeil and another girl were billeted with country people in Somerset.
We were put in the garden. They had a cage. They used to have birds in this, and in the morning they'd let the birds out, and then we were put in it with a bottle of water and we would stay there all day, and then in the evening we'd go in and have to have a wash and have something to eat, and then we were put to bed. I know that I found out afterwards it was the doctor that sent for my mum. I mean, I had whooping cough, chicken pox and measles all at the same time. And in the end, the doctor wrote to my mum and said, come and get her.
Marlene Hesseldine's evacuation was equally bad.
It's hard to imagine, but these two people, in fact, that had taken in two youngsters from London to shelter from the war, in fact, had just systematically beaten us, starved us, abused us, and totally were set about turning us into animals. We couldn't sleep, we were infested, our head was alive with lice and fleas. The beds, I suppose, were hardly ever changed and filthy. And of course, in the end, we got scabies. And what with that and the malnutrition, I think, we were steadily going downhill.
Within a few months of the outbreak of war, many of the evacuees were drifting back to the cities, partly because of the children's unhappiness, but also because the German bombers had failed to arrive. Numbers varied from region to region, but by December, something like 1 in 3 unaccompanied children from London had returned to their homes, as well as about half the mothers evacuated with very small children.
There's very, very few evacuees left, because if the children were that unhappy, the mums said, right, that's it, you're coming home. End of story.
There were no raids, no bombs, no air raid warnings.